Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to the On the Whistle podcast. My name is Ali Howorth. In this series, we are building up to the Club World Cup. Yes, the new FIFA tournament happening in the US. It's gotten some good press, it's got some bad press, but for us here on the Whistle, and I think for those across Africa, we're excited to see Mamelodi Sundowns, Espérance, Al Ahly, and Wydad represent the continent on the biggest stage. And today we're talking about Espérance. Of course, Espérance Tunis, the biggest club in Tunisia, the most successful club in Tunisia, and the ones that are representing Tunisia at the Club World Cup. They're in a group with Flamengo from Brazil, LAFC from the US, and Chelsea from England, of course. So it's going to be an interesting group, and there is no one better to speak to us about Espérance than one of their own, one of their legends, former player, former CAF Champions League winner, former CAF Cup, I think not even CAF Cup Winners' Cup, the predecessor to the Confederations Cup, the CAF Super Cup, and of course, plenty of other titles in Tunisia. Radhi Jaidi, who's also an AFCON winner. What a legend. He's come to join us today. Radhi, how are you doing today, brother?
Hi Ali, how are you? Thank you for these invites. I really appreciate, your presentation about myself. I'm looking forward, to discuss the World Cup, which is the club's World Cup, which is a great event coming soon.
Yeah, and it's a particular joy to have you joining us because the Club World Cup for me at least is such a brilliant opportunity to kind of showcase what we represent, what different clubs from around the world represent to the world, because most of the time we don't hear about, if unless you're in Africa, unless you're in Tunisia, you're not hearing about Espérance, you're not hearing about Al Ahly, unless you're in Egypt, unless you're in Africa. So oftentimes we're drowned with European football, with the Real Madrids, with the kind of Manchester Uniteds of this world. So for me, there's no one better to speak to, because you've lived and breathed Espérance. You've been a player, you've been a coach as well recently there. But tell me, what have you been up to? How are you doing now? You've been coaching for a few years now. Tell us what's going on.
Yes, of course. Let's start with how I've been up to. I think the last I think 5 years, maybe 6 years, it was a great. Um, uh, I was away, just try to experience a head coach roles in different continent, and let me say I learned a lot. Like it's been like a really a big storm, like I say, in my career, which is in a positive way. I've been to USA, I've been to Europe, and I've been to Africa, three different continents, three different culture, and then that give me the right ideas and the right possibility to understand how I can also um, make my approach, my philosophy, and my management and leadership philosophy better. And and uh, I'm grateful for this, because I met a lot of people, and I met a lot of ownership, and a lot of people that can help me to adapt myself.
Mm. And you've said you've gotten this experience. You've been coaching with, in on the continent with Esperance, Pardieu. You've been with Cercle Brugge in Belgium. You've done stuff in the US and the UK. You've been spent time at St George's Park recently, kind of brushing up on the latest and sharpest with coaching minds. You say you're kind of open. Obviously, you're someone with so much diversity of experience, not just in your coaching, but your own experience as a young child coming up through in Gavish, and then going to the Esperance setup, and then being one of the very very few players to have ever made that transition straight from an African league into the Premier League. Joining Bolton. You could go so many different places in the world. Would you be, interested in coming back to the continent, or are there any kind of countries or areas in the world that you kind of really think, I would love to have a coaching experience there?
Yeah, listen, Ali, from day one when I retired from football back in 2012, um, the first thing I think about is how I can give back, to my country. And I always consider myself, of course, as an African, individuals, and how I can help, the African continent. So when I first thought it's the best, to go back to my country to help it. And let me tell you something, the experience I had in Espérance was amazing as a head coach. I was a Espérance football player, but when I came back as a head coach, was totally different approach, because that took me to different level. Not just a former player, you're a decision maker, and then you have to help the people, players and staff, to see the bigger side, the bigger picture of football, not just the way we see it in our country. And that was quite a big challenge, because if you want to implement the European mentality on in Africa, it's not going to work. But as a former player and as a Tunisian born, um, I know what football stands for these people. So I found the middle way, to influence the people, and then try to and then take them to progressively to that level. Unfortunately, the experience didn't end. In Espérance, we had the little successes. My project was in 2 years in Espérance. The first year is to work on a pitch, on a style of play, implementing the principles of play, and then the philosophy around it. And then the second year, or at least throughout, this is to implement the right players that fit to the style of play that allows you to go and dominate. Espérance is a club who win titles, who work for titles, lives for titles. All the stakeholders around you, speaking about ownership, up to the fans, up to the media, they live for trophies. When I came and knew that I don't have a lot of time, so I put directly, a quick impact on the style of play. But the only spot we're missing is to implement, the right players. To implement the right players, you need to have the right recruitment strategy, which is something we didn't have. So I had, to prepare, and at the same time try to have, that impact, which is unfortunately, needs more time. If we had the second year, I would probably win the Champions League. Of course, I knew I had to take my responsibility on that aspect, but it was a huge experience. Now I know if I go to another club who plays on the titles, you need to have the right players, on the right moment. These are the learning curve that helped me to. I reflected last period, and these are the learning curve that I think, when I go to another club, I would probably put straight impact, and then winning in the first with my first steps.
Yeah, and talking about the World Cup, obviously you won the CAF Champions League in 1994. It was at the beginning of your career when you were still quite young, and then you'd go on to win three or four more other trophies on the continental stage. I went through the 1994 Champions League teams, and to have a look that if the Club World Cup existed then, what would it have looked like? And so I looked. You could have potentially been in a group with the champions of different continents. So if you potentially could have been in a group in 1995 if Esperance were at the Club World Cup with AC Milan, obviously from Italy, Vélez Sarsfield from Argentina, and Thai Farmers Bank from Thailand, which I must confess I'd never heard of before looking it up. For you as a player, all the way back then, could you imagine what it would have been like to play these countries from completely clubs from completely different countries, countries you may not have even heard about, and for you, how much, is there almost a sense where you wish there could have been something like this back then when you were playing for Esperance?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, you put your fingers on a really good, important, point, Ali. I think as a younger player at that time, I was seeking this kind of experiences. Uh, um, I was really upset when we lost the final on I think 99 with Esperance as well, because I knew that new version that time. It was, very beneficial. It would be very beneficial for myself, to go and expose myself against that level. When you play AC Milan, I was lucky with Esperance. I played AC Milan in a friendly, but it was really big. Imagine you're playing a World Cup game against these type of superstars. At that age, it would be a great reference for your career.
And Let's get on to Esperance this season, because they're in a bit of a funny place, right? Because they had they've had three coaches. There's been a lot of chaos. Obviously, they had Miguel Cardozo at the beginning of the season. They got to the CAF Champions League final last season. They have a decent start, not great. He then gets sacked, and then they bring in the Romanian Rengenkamp, Laurentio Regenkamp. Apologies if I mispronounced that. He does all right. They get through the group stage. Obviously, they're in a fairly easy group with Joliba and Sagrada Esperanza, as well as Pyramids, who obviously go on to win the CAF Champions League. Esperance topped that group. But then he gets sacked right before the quarterfinals of the CAF Champions League. They get knocked out by Mamelodi Sundowns, now coached by Miguel Cardozo. There's kind of a level of irony there. But under Maher Kanzari, they've finished very strongly. They won the Tunisian League, they won the Tunisian Cup last week. So they've got the double. They won the Super Cup earlier in the season. So they've kind of ended very strongly this season that has kind of been very, very chaotic. What do you make of the team, in particular the squad, because it is quite an exciting squad in many ways. Obviously, they brought back Youssef Belali at the beginning of the season, who's a legend of the team, as well as the Algerian national team. But then they've also signed some really interesting young players. I'm thinking of that midfield. Anuchi Ogbelu scored the winner in the cup final last weekend. Abderrahman Konate from Cote d'Ivoire. I'm not sure if he'll be back in time for the Club World Cup. He's struggling with a muscle injury. But what do you make of the team right now and the season they've had in Tunisia and in the Champions League?
Yeah, it's quite interesting, Esperance. I've been following Esperance, since, and I think, since I left from Esperance, it was like 5 or 6 coaches came, and I was probably the last one who stayed more than 10 months. Um, and this is, I think, going back to only two things from my perspective. I think Esperance, they were looking um, for the right performance, and of course the results. So the right performance that allows them to win games, but also I think from coaching perspective, they're looking for a coach with attitude, with the right attitude that fits the club's culture. So these three aspects are key, I think, for Esperance. um, and despite they reached the final with Cardozo, they were not convinced maybe with the way they're playing, because I remember the critics around Cardozo was defensive perspective, which is I don't think at a certain extent, because Cardozo was more strategic than looking for the style of play. Okay, and Espérance, that's exactly Espérance. Espérance is a style of play, is a culture, is history behind the way we're playing. Because when I first go to Espérance, I focused, as I said to you, on the style of play and the tradition, because I knew the club. I knew what the club standing for. The club is club that dominate the ball, all the way long, with depth, and then try also and winning games. And that's what I thought, okay, there is an explanation behind, Cardozo leaving, the club, despite they reached the final and I lost the final. But then, the coaches came in after. It was going downhill because they couldn't find the right profile. So um, this year was a good example of what you can see from Esperance. Three coaches in a less than I think 6 7 months. Despite the club is progressing in the league and progressing in the Champions League, um, it was a frustration around the club and the ownership. So that there is an explanation for people who knows the club. Maybe it's a bit strange and weird for the people who look at the club from far, from outside. And um, and um, the fact you have Kanzari coming back to the club, that explain what I'm trying to say. Kanzari played for the club and he knows the club. He knows the league, the Tunisian league, because they got him that time to take Espérance, because Espérance, at a certain extent, they struggled in the league. At some point, they were third on the table, and that was like a red light for everyone. Let's go and get back to the basics. And then they got a profile like Meher Kanzali, who knows the club, knows the culture, knows the history. He maybe has good way about him. and then get the defensive structure right, and then use the individuals like Blayley you mentioned, like Sass you mentioned. You forget about Sass. I think he's the most goals scored, 10 goals. And then you have Ashraf Jabri, who they got him back from on loan, who's a striker who give us a good structure offensively. He's a striker that I worked with when he was in the academy. I got him, to the first team, and I worked a lot of specific with him, a lot of individuals to help him, position himself between the two center backs, be the one who create the depth, for the team, and then using the Sass and then Blayley as a quick attack and good individuals to go and attack, teams, and that worked for Meher Kanzari, I think, and that put him back, in on a track, put them back on a track, and then Espérance now they won the league, and of course coincides with the World Cup, which is a very exciting, moment for all the club, for all the all the people connected to the club. Um, um, the I think the Esperance strength this season is they have a big squad, and a squad full of quality, different styles. If you're a coach, you can use whatever style you wanted, or you whatever strategy you wanted to have. You have good individuals both sides, quality 1v1s and 1v1 attacking, and you have a pace about it. If you wanted to have choice in the midfielders, you have a choice. I think Agbelo is a good a player that gives the team a good balance because he's a good defensively. His presence is really physically is there, but also on the ball he can obviously detect the play. He can help the teams to play, and around him you have the players like uh, what's it called, Tra, that we got from Monastir. He's a good player. The only issue we had this season, especially with the injury of Yassine Mirieh, the defender, is the defensive line, especially the two center backs. And this is something that I always I said Esperance they need to recruit at least one experienced center back that help the balance before the World Cup. I'm a bit surprised, Esperance didn't have, any recruitment yet. At least a strategic recruitment that help the teams to be better next season in the Champions League. Because if they stay the same, even Meriah come back from injury, Meriah and then Tugay, two of them, not enough. You need at least the third centre backs that whether one wanted to play with the three centre backs as a 3-4-2-1 or 3-5-2, or at least you have a good sub that can make impact anytime, and also give the confidence, to the team. Um, Having two good centre backs give a confidence to all the other teams, especially the midfielders, to go and take risks at times, to go and attack. So yeah, it will be interesting in the World Cup. If uh, if Esperance they're gonna get recruitment or no is a good question mark for me.
I think that's a very good point because obviously Yassin Maria, he, been at two World Cups with Tunisia, captain of the club, super experienced center back, real talent. And, he injured himself in November, did his cruciate, and is just coming back kind of to fitness. He's been on the bench for a few games. I think he came off the bench in the cup final. But it does feel strange to kind of, because like you say, that's the big hole in the team, to put a lot of your hopes on him coming back and being fully fit, because that's such a big ask to kind of just immediately jump into the team ahead of their games. Now, I want to hear your thoughts on this because I'm very excited personally for Esperance uh, in this Club World Cup, because I actually think they have a group that they can get out of. I think a lot of the other teams have some really tough groups. I think in particular Sundowns and Wydad have really tough groups that they'll struggle out for. But for me, I kind of have pinned my hopes on Al Ahly and Esperance coming into this first game. Obviously, I'm actually in Brazil right now, ahead of the Club World Cup, and their first game is against Flamengo, and Flamengo are in terrific form. Top of the Serie A here in Brazil, getting out of the group stage in the Copa Libertadores. They have a very, very good team. I think of some of the players. I think they're even bringing in Jorginho from Arsenal. Obviously, huge amount of experience there. They have players like Alexandro, used to be at Juve, Pedro, who's regularly played up front for Brazil, De Arrascaeta, who's kind of the creative heartbeat of Flamengo, but also the Uruguayan national team. That first game is going to be huge for Esperance if they can get a result against Flamengo, because Chelsea, they're obviously, in terms of the squad and the quality of it, they have the best squad. But I think that's a squad that can implode. We know we've seen this season in the Premier League where they've struggled. Again, there's always that question with the European teams: how serious will they take the competition? So I'm so curious how they'll approach this, and I want to ask you that because, like you said, Esperance, that identity is so powerful, the identity of winning, but also, like you said, dominating, and not necessarily dominating in kind of a Sundowns way with kind of cute kind of like really a high technical possession based football, but real kind of dominance, whether that's physical dominance, technical dominance. But suddenly Esperance are in a tournament where they can't necessarily play that way. They're not going to be able to dominate possession against Flamengo or against Chelsea. LAFC may be a bit more, but I want to know, how would you approach this as a coach, or how do you think Esperance should approach this tournament? Because they're suddenly not the favorites. They're suddenly not the kind of big team in a small pond. Suddenly they're playing these other giants. How do you think they should approach, particularly this first game against Flamengo?
Yeah, it's a great questions because if I'm a coach of Esperance, I would be already have a strategy for the four teams I'm gonna play against. So you have Chelsea are different to Flamengo, are different to LA FC, and then the three teams are totally different structure and different way of playing. Um, what make it a little bit harder for Esperance in this tournament is the first game against Flamengo. So it would be big shock. It would be big shock culturally and then mentally, like I mentioned, and then of course the quality, the level of the Brazilian team, especially Flamengo, that are in a good run. They're top of their league. They have quality players there. If you look at Carrasca, Carrasqueta is one of the best midfielders, attacking midfielders who jump on the box and then he can score goals, but also give assists, and then good quality players. So it would be a big cultural shock because Esperance in a league, in Tunisian league, they're dominating the ball, and then they can do whatever they want at a certain extent. Even with Mer Kanzari, I thought they were more structured defensively. They were slightly deep, and they play quick attack and counter attack using Ashraf Jabri, like I said, and then Blayley, and then Sass. I think Mer Kanzari will do the same thing. I'm not gonna say my philosophy. My philosophy is coming back a way before. I would be prepared, Esperance style of play to at least dominate some moment in the team in the game, because Esperance, for our own convictions, and you speak here about especially the fans, the stakeholders. When you watch a game, they watch a game with emotion. They watch a game as Espérance. They don't care about Flamengo, with due my respect, or Chelsea. They care about just only Espérance. So Espérance, during the 90 minutes, they need to have a moment where they are dominating. So how are you gonna dominate this moment? Yeah. So you need to have the right decisions, the right team, squad, the right, squad selection. The 11 started against Flamengo. They're gonna be different against Chelsea. They're gonna be different against LA. And then I think against Flamengo, we need more like especially in the middle, you need to have at least two midfielders who have a good defensive way to make sure the Flamengo midfielders, they're always under pressure. They're always not comfortable to receive the ball in behind, in between, and then try to get in the probably try to expose the last line. So having a good midfielders, a block that allows you to reduce the quality, their quality, but also in the wide areas. So you need to have a good full backs. I know Ben Hamid, the captain, is always constant, and he always have a good performance in general. He's the one that I had a lot of discussion about him, with the ownership, to keep him performing and keep him gaining experience, because I knew he has a good mentality. So I don't think the World Cup experience will stop him, will give him a good progression. But the only issue we have on the right, so on the right you have um, the young um, I can't remember the name, a younger right back. He's not Schneeber, yeah. So he just got to the team and he just started to perform. So it's gonna be another, maybe a point that you need to consider. Would you probably put someone as a winger who can help him, and then help him in the 1v1s and help him to maybe control players like Everton from Flamingo, who's a player who had the quality, had experience, maybe 20, 29 years old. You can see right footed, so maybe again inside. So you need someone to double up with him and then try, to reduce, his quality. So all these aspects, I think Mer Kanzari need to take in account, and then prepare the team and prepare the starting at 11 to manage to reduce, the quality of Flamengo. Flamengo, they want to dominate the football, and then they dictate the tempo. This is something that you need to understand about Brazilian teams. They're good in, you know, uh, control their tempo. So they can start slow and then boom, boom, boom. So they can, take the tempo, especially as soon as they arrive to the final third, and they go very quick. So good at it. So all these, strategic, you need to prepare. Do you consider different system of play? Maybe you play 5-4-1 at a certain extent, maybe flexible hybrid, system that allows you to attack when you get the ball, maybe get the width and then get the depth and then dominate the ball. Try, obviously to hit them with some quick attacks. All the aspects you need to consider. Um, and for me, it's very important, the preparation before you go to the World Cup. If you go to USA, you should be ready, and you have a clear strategy to go and exploit. But the most important thing for me, Espérance, even in a World Cup, and people link it to Espérance, fans, media, all the stakeholders, the ownership. They won't accept Espérance will defend 90% against all these teams. They won't accept. That will people. It's like a party for us. Tunisia in general, when they see Espérance perform in this World Cup, it's an enjoyment, and it's a mixed feeling, being proud and being happy to be part of the elite clubs in the world. Going there and then showing a wrong performance, it can make it, it can make some drama, for inside the team, and especially for the coach. So for me, when I spoke to the players when I was in Espérance, I told them, your only problem with me as a coach now, I played for Espérance and I know what's mean Espérance. So anyone not aligned with the club's culture and the club's expectation, at least, you'll have problem with me, because I played for Espérance and I know what's mean Espérance. But obviously, I'm here to help you get to that level. If you need, any support, I'm here to help you. And I worked, from 8 to 8 during the days, because I wanted to help players individually, Ali. Because these players, they need a lot of support, from four corners. I'm speaking about technically, tactically, and physically and psychologically. They need a lot of support, because at a certain extent in Tunisia, we missing that base of development in the academy level. So I went there to help as well the young players. And as I mentioned, players like Muhammad Ali bin Ramadan, who left Esperance and he wanted to play Europe, because of the support that we showed him, during this season. And a lot of young players Esperance have now. If the club decide to take only the local players, which is great, example of ownership, um, they need to go there and experience themselves as Esperance, not to bring something new, playing deep block, counterattack, system that not gonna help them to be confident in future.
And yeah, and I think that's where it's kind of so interesting from the kind of tactical point, because you're talking about, do you drop someone to help with Schneeba at right back, but then that right winger is Jan Sass, who's obviously been the kind of creative heart and attacking threat, and so there's kind of this tension of how do you approach it. And I think for Maher, there's going to be so many questions like that of how do you approach it, and like you say, I think both Flamengo and Chelsea in particular will dominate the ball, but like you say, in very different ways. The Brazilian style of kind of dictating tempo, keeping it slower, and then kind of then getting it into certain players. And
Chelsea is slightly different. Sorry, Ali. Chelsea is slightly different. We all watching Chelsea. I'm in England. I watched Chelsea. During the season. Probably I think the hardest bit about Chelsea now, include the manager, is they're super confident now because they won obviously the Confederation League. So the from Palma up to Majuka and then Sancho and then all these players, the young talented players, throughout the season they showed lack of consistency with the results. And everyone see, Chelsea always, having 2-3 games winning and then 2-3 games maybe not the right results and probably not the right performance. And Chelsea probably are less ask, for Espérance than Flamengo. Especially Chelsea, their defensive line is very um, unpredictable, so they can make big mistakes. So if you play, for example, head to head against them, you can get something. It's totally different to the Brazilian,
100%.
teams.
And I think for me, what's very interesting about Esperance more so than from Al Ahly and from Wydad and Sundowns is, yeah, how young the team is, because you're saying that midfield is probably the most important thing, and I agree. But you think if Konate is fit and he's the one sitting with Ogbello, you have a 22-year-old and a 19-year-old. There's so much pressure on these young guys, and I'm excited to see. Ready, the final question I want to ask you then is, I want to hear your prediction. How do you think Esperance are going to get on in this group? It's a tough group. I know I said they're one of the groups I hope that the African team can get out of, but it's a tough group, and so much of it rides on that first game against Flamengo. They have to get a result. What is your prediction for this group? What is your prediction for Esperance at the Club World Cup?
Well, I'm cut in between, being the fan of Esperance and also, the coach. I think despite it's a great, party for the club and for all the people connected to the club. I think it's always go back to the first game, go back to the second and the third game, and Esperance, they need to get away with the first game and then try obviously to get results against, the other team. Chelsea is opportunity if they play head to head. I think for one game, being realistic, from one game things can happen, and you know what, football. The last game a must win. Last game must win. So for me, it's all go back to the first game. If Esperance um, gets maybe from 4 to 6 points in this group, they can qualify, definitely. So take the tournament as game per game and then try to get points maximum as possible. I think it's feasible. It's hard. It's hard against Chelsea, Flamengo, at least these teams, not disrespecting, LA, but against Flamengo or Chelsea, these teams you need to get point if you want to qualify. And for me, it's possible, but it's very hard and it's very difficult. Esperance need to be at that top, above that top, for them to qualify.
Brilliant. Reddy, thank you so much. It's been great hearing from you, obviously the former player and coach of Esperance. As you said, you have to speak as the coach, you have to speak with the tactical mind, but as a fan, I'm sure we all want Esperance to do well. We all want the African clubs to do well. Radhi Jaidi, thank you so much for joining the On the Whistle podcast, and have a wonderful rest of your day.